So Tom's on vacation, and our producer Raina is also on vacation, which means I think I'm going to go rogue and make my own podcast episode. Welcome to Curiously Climate. Howdy, friends. Shel Weekly alongside with you. Yeah, my good friend and co-host Tom DiLiberto is taking some much-needed time off, as is our producer Raina. So why not just take over the podcast, right? Welcome to a microclimate edition of Curiously Climate. We are a podcast from Climate Central. And look, I wanted to do this because we had some really big news come out this week about a temperature threshold that nobody ever wanted to cross again, that it has been a long time coming, but we just hit a pretty significant milestone, and not in a good way. Also, we have a lot of heat that a lot of you are going to walk out to this weekend. So as you're sweaty and walking around listening to this podcast, I figured, why not drop a little bit of knowledge as well? So let's get straight into it. You may have caught this on your social feeds, but NOAA officially confirmed that July 2026, you just lived through the absolute hottest month we have ever recorded here in the lower 48 of the United States. Now, let's back up for just a second. If you remember in your social studies or your history books from long ago, we all learned about the Dust Bowl. We saw the pictures of the big wall of dirt that was coming towards towns. You would see families that were there with dirt all around them, right? So within the Dust Bowl was July 1936. And for 90 years, that stood as not only the hottest July of record, but the hottest all-time month that had been recorded in the United States. But what happened after the Dust Bowl is that natural variability took back over, right? So we know that there was heat, there was drought, there was the Dust Bowl era farming practices, but eventually we got back to what you would expect weather to be. Unfortunately, it doesn't look right now that we have a chance of going back anytime soon. So that's why this one's different. And I really want to parse out what made this record. So the way that we get this record to understand that this was the hottest month, that it was a month that was over 3 degrees above what you would expect a July to be. Look, I'm not saying that July isn't supposed to be hot, but this was well above the leaps and bounds of it. So we understand when you average everything out, right? So your overnight lows and daytime highs, we put those together and that's your average temperature. That's what gets you the record. But then we can also break that apart to say, okay, what were the highs? And so when you average highs across the lower 48 for the month of July, it was the 6th hottest month of record for the month of July that we experienced. But where this record really was pushed, where it pushed us to these record levels over the Dust Bowl record, was your overnight lows. Because when you took all of the overnight lows and you averaged them across the 31 nights that we experienced, in the United States, we have not experienced a warmer, low temperature average than what we experienced here in July 2026. And this isn't something that's new. In fact, Climate Central put out a release this week talking about warm summer nights. About 95% of the over 240 cities that we analyzed have experienced warmer summer nights through the months of June, July, and August. Summer nights are warming almost twice as fast as summer days. So we're feeling intense heat during the daytime, but we're also exceptionally feeling it during the nighttime. And that's really important for folks that don't have air conditioning, don't have the means to run their air conditioning 24 hours a day. This is where danger sets in, especially in our homes, because your body's supposed to recuperate during the nighttime hours from the day's heat and reset. You just can't do that when you have compounding heat and a lot of these day-night back and forths of extremes. So when you put all those together, that's how we got to the record. And a lot of that ties to ocean warmth. We're seeing more moisture in atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. Oceans that are warmer because they sink our heat trapping pollution, right? They allow for more evaporation. And so if you're evaporating more moisture and you have an atmosphere that can hold more moisture, then yeah, you're going to get an air mass that's more humid, more stuffy, more sticky, and that just doesn't cool down as easy. So that's the big piece of why July 2026 was so much more significant than July 1936. Now, the other side of the story as we go into the weekend is, yes, another heat dome is expected for the United States, for at least the central and the eastern side of the United States. But again, the really big story here is the nighttime temperature. So I'll give you this. On Tuesday, August 11th, if we use attribution science at Climate Central, we use what's called the Climate Shift Index. We can understand the fingerprint of climate change on an unusual temperature. We can understand how much more likely, how much more frequent did climate change make a temperature like that. And so on August 11th, on our Tuesday, we had the largest spatial extent. So basically, a climate shift index fingerprint across the United States that we've ever seen for nighttime temperatures, meaning we had the biggest footprint of climate change impacting the temperatures that we walked out to the next morning that we've ever seen in terms of the database. Now, to go alongside with that, between August 10th and August 12th, 201 million Americans walked out the door to a very warm morning that was made at least 3 times more likely to occur. So it had a very strong fingerprint of climate change. And then between August 13th and 14th, we had 138 million of us who did the same. That walked out to a climate shift index of 3 or higher, meaning it was a temperature 3 times more likely. And if you go to csi.climatecenter.org and you look at the map, you'll see a lot of very deep maroon, a climate shift index of 5. And what that means is that, yes, even here in August, when what is expected to be the hottest time of the year for a lot of us, these temperatures in the upper 70s, even low 80s that we're experiencing would be almost virtually impossible to occur without a fingerprint of climate change. And again, this ties back to the ocean. So this big heat dome that's built is over the United States, but it also stretches all the way back to the Atlantic. And underneath that heat dome that's pushing down on the atmosphere, it's over waters that are unusually warm, up to 100 to 300 times more likely because of climate change. So it's this feedback loop. You've got warmer oceans, and that heat is basically being picked up and shuttled underneath this heat dome towards the United States. It's all tied together. One last thing for you, if that's not enough, and if you're actually just interested in more, we actually did just put out a release. I'll put it in the show notes, but the oceans across the globe are all having in some way, shape, or form a marine heat wave. The big story right now is the historic El Nino that's building. The Pacific Ocean is having a historic heat wave. Some parts of the Pacific Ocean have been in a marine heat wave for about 80% of our year so far. But so is every other basin in the United States. So take the Pacific, for example, 94% of the Pacific basin has experienced some sort of marine heat wave. Over 85% of that would not have occurred without climate change. But I think the bigger, more interesting one for me specifically, 40% of the Gulf of Mexico as of mid-August is underneath a marine heat wave, is experiencing a marine heat wave. 98% of that would not have occurred without climate change. So essentially, the marine heat wave that the Gulf of Mexico is having, the fever that the Gulf of Mexico has right now, would not have occurred without human-caused climate change. Again, more details about that, about warm summer nights, and about this historic record. It is up right now at climatecenter.org, as well as on all of our social media platforms. So with that, I'm going to go before I get yelled at by Tom and Raina. But yeah, thanks for hanging out for this microclimate edition of Curiously Climate. And if you do want to hear more about heat, yes, this is the hottest time of the year. The next episode, our last episode that we released, we had a great conversation with the Corey Stringer Institute talking about heat at this time of the year specifically, how that impacts our bodies, how that impacts student athletes' bodies, and maybe why we should rethink what's starting right now for a lot of student athletes, which is the high school football season. Okay, with that being said, my name is Shel Winkley. Thanks for stopping by for this edition of Curiously Climate. I'll catch you back here